Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon I bid to all of my fellow viewers, whether you are an IPG student or not. So in today's video, we are going to talk about the impact of social mobility on education in Malaysia under the subtopic of a sociological evaluation of progress, policy, and also persistent gaps. Now, before we continue with my presentation, let me first briefly introduce who I am. Well, the name given is Muhammad Haris Hanafi bin Muhammad Johari, and I am from PISMP TESOL-D 2023-2028 intake from IPG Kampus Bahasa Antarabangsa, and my supervisor lecturer for this assignment is Madam Norhana binti Matbilis. And I am doing this assignment according to the EDUP3143 under Sociology in Education. Now, without further ado, let us move on to our main topic. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are at our first presentation slide, which I'm going to talk about the introduction and presentation objectives. Now, before we talk about anything, if we want to deliver or speak about any topic, we have to make an introduction, and also we need to present our objectives beforehand. Now here there are three key points that we are going to focus on. The first one is the task overview, where my presentation will be analyzing how the Malaysian education system serves as a vehicle for social mobility. Now when we look upon the overview here, we are emphasizing more on social mobility, or to be even more specific, we are focusing in the Malaysian context itself. Let's move on to the second one, which is the objectives. Now here I am focusing on three objectives that I'm targeting on. The first one is I am able to define social mobility within the Malaysian context, as I explained earlier in the task overview. The second objective is to address the WH questions. Now you may ask, what is the WH questions? Well, it is stated here. Why is it important? And what are its effects on education? And then the final objective is to able to critically evaluate the current landscape using sociological theory and national data. Whatever that we are talking about, we need to ensure that we have proper data, and we have to cite it as well to show professionalism in our writing and presenting. And then to sum up of how I'm going to talk about it in chronological order, I have come up with a circle graph here, which firstly we are going to talk about the theory, and then we're going to talk about the policy, evidence, and then we will come up with the evaluation. Now this is the clear overview of what I am going to talk about in today's presentation. So let us move on to the next one. Alright, so we have come up to our first content, which is defining what is social mobility. Now since we are talking primarily about social mobility, therefore we need to know what it means. And if there are any types, what are the types of social mobility there is? So first, let's talk about the definition of what is social mobility. Now to put it simple, it means how a person's social status can change based on factors. Now these factors can come around like education levels, or their income, perhaps their occupation, or even their wealth status. Now the movement of individuals or groups within a society's social hierarchy or class structure over time. So this can also mean of social mobility. And we have defined what social mobility is, and of course in social class we have types, and these types are called as types of social mobility. And you may wonder how many types there is for social mobility. Now specifically there are 4 types of social mobility. Now the first one is called vertical mobility, or known as the upward and downward mobility. Now what does vertical mobility mean? Now to put it simple, if you said vertical, it is a straight line, upward and downward. So it means moving to a higher or to a lower social position. For an example, a student from a low-income family becomes a doctor. That is how we define as vertical mobility. The second one is horizontal mobility, left to right, which are changing jobs or roles without changing social status. For an example, teacher to another teacher role in a different school. It doesn't change the status, but change the occupation. And then we have intergenerational mobility. Now this changes in social status between generations. For an example here, a child achieves a higher status than parents. This is what we call as intergenerational. And then the final one, or the fourth one, is called intra-generational mobility. Now, to put it in very simple words, it is changes within a person's lifetime, meaning they are gradually changing in their social mobility status. So we have come up with the definition and also the types of social mobility. Now let us move on to the next one. Okay, now recently we have talked about defining what is social mobility, and now we are talking about the importance of social mobility, or why is social mobility important. Now we are going to look upon a few views or a few perspectives. The first one, we are going to view upon the functionalist view, where I have emphasized on 3 points. The first one is the great equalizer. Now, according to the Davies-Moore thesis, education is seen as a meritocratic tool that ensures the most talented individuals fill the most complex role. Now, you may ask, what is meritocratic tool? Now, meritocratic here means that someone is given benefits in their role. For an example, if I am an educated person, I may fill in a lot of gaps in the educational field, which will benefit the country, my people, and also myself. So it means that if you are benefited with a few talents that you have more than anyone else, you will fulfill that role and fulfill the complex roles in your society. So this will be a great equalizer according to the Davies-Moore thesis. And then we move to the second one, which is the economic efficiency. Now, why is it important? Because it prevents the wastage of talent. For example, a society will thrive when a brilliant B40 student can become a neurosurgeon. Now, this is to emphasize that even low-income students can be better and may become a brilliant individual when it comes to economic efficiency. We move on to the final one, which is the incentive structure, which is the hope of upward mobility, encourage hard work and personal investment in skills. So social mobility is important, especially in the incentive structure, because we want these low-income students to achieve higher ranks, to achieve higher educational field, and to receive equal and equity education, so that it will encourage other people to work hard and also to invest themselves to be able to learn a lot of skills, so they can not only provide for themselves, but they can also provide for their society and also for their race, for their culture, and most importantly, for their country. Next, we are going to look upon the Malaysian context. Now, I'm also emphasizing on 3 points, which is national unity, economy Madani framework, and also preventing class rigidity. Now we are going to look upon the first one, which is national unity. Now what I emphasize here is that mobility reduces ethnic and class-based friction. Or in Malaysia, it is a pillar of the Rukun Negara. If we are emphasizing social mobility, we need to make sure that every student, no matter what race or social background they are, we need to emphasize and ensure that they acquire equal educational rights no matter what race you are. And this is also a part of the Rukun Negara as well. Then we move on to the second point, which is the economy Madani framework, which it aligns with the government's raise the floor pillar. Now this ensures that the baseline quality of life is lifted for all Malaysians by 2026. Now we are aware as Malaysians that the approach of Madani is very important and very crucial for all individuals in Malaysia, no matter what race you are. We are trying to approach the holistic development for every culture. That is why, by emphasizing on equal social mobility, we are able to align with the Madani framework. And then the last one is preventing class rigidity. Now here, without mobility, society becomes a caste system, which will lead to frustration and potential unrest. In no matter what situation you are, what race, what culture, what religion, you need to ensure that you work together with other people as well. You cannot segregate yourself from other cultures. You can learn, you can adapt, but as I said, you need to have a very strong opinion about yourself and your culture and beliefs. But this does not mean that you should offend other people's culture as well. This is mean by preventing class rigidity. Okay, now we are going to talk about the effects. What are the effects of social mobility on education? But here we are going to emphasize on a few points as well as what we have explained on the importance of social mobility. Now the first one, we are going to look upon the credential inflation. Now what does credential inflation means? Well, credential inflation is the rising educational requirement for jobs that do not necessarily require enhanced skills, leading to a devaluation of degrees. For example, bachelor's degree, acting as new high school diplomas. Yes. Okay, so we're going to look upon 3 points, which is the paper chase, credentialism, and also the effects. Okay, now the first one is the paper chase. Now you might as well ask yourselves, what is paper chase? What do you mean by the paper chase? Now, as I explained in this presentation, the term paper chase refers to the intense pursuit of qualifications. Now, how do I define this intense pursuit of qualification? Is I have made a chronological order of how it is being explained. Now, first it starts off as social mobility tied to education, and then it will lead to more people that will go to universities. And then when this happens, of course, it's like happened in nowadays where diplomas are becoming common. But because social mobility is now tied with the education, more people will go to universities, more people would pursue a lot in diplomas and degrees. When we talk about degrees, degrees will eventually become common. And when this happens, of course, employers will demand higher qualifications, and this will lead people to chase more credentials in the educational field. This is what it means by the paper chase. And then the second one is credentialism. Now, according to the World Bank Group, which they made an analysis in the 2025, in the 2024, there are almost 5.98 million graduates in Malaysia. Okay, and this is because degrees are very common among our country. The value decreases. Now, this forces students to pursue masters or PhD to maintain a competitive edge. Now, this is what it means by credentialism. And what are the effects? Overall, the effects is education will become more about the certificate rather than the learning. Now, this is the effects of social mobility on education, which is very dangerous. Okay, now next, we are going to talk about the same topic, but different content, which we are emphasizing on the shadow education. Now, you may also ask yourself, what is shadow education? Now, shadow education actually refers to private fee-charging tutoring that supplements mainstream schooling, mimicking its curriculum to help students improve their academic performance efficiently. Now, here we are focusing on 3 points, which is marketization, the mobility race, and also the institutional shift. Now, the first one is marketization. Now, the meaning of marketization is the process through which higher education institutions increase their autonomy, which by diversify funding sources and also adapt to market dynamics. Now, the drive for mobility has created a multi-billion ringgit shadow education industry, which is, for example, tuition and also enrichment centers. Now, because we are chasing education, now these shadow educations come in, and when they come in, they benefit a lot because, of course, in education we want to learn as the best as possible. Now, shadow education, for example, like tutoring or private classes, will differ from general places. For example, they will provide you more knowledge and more tips on how to answer certain things, which will lead to the second one, which is the mobility race. Now, parents view education as a high-stakes competition. Now, this puts almost immense psychological pressure on students from as early as standard 1. Now, we know that the higher the educational level, the higher the standards will be, the more pressure the students will be put against their parents, because their parents want the best for their children, and of course their parents will do anything to ensure that their children will get the best possible educational outcome for their family, for themselves, for their sons, daughters, and most importantly for their country. And then the final point, it is the institutional shift, the growth of private universities or IPTS to cater to those who can afford faster or exclusive routes to mobility. And let's move on to the next one. Okay, so we have talked entirely about theory. Now we move on to the policy context, which we will be emphasizing on a few. The first one is the new economic policy and the educational blueprint. Now, all of these points will be supported by the Ministry of Education according to their analysis in 2013. Okay, so we are emphasizing on 3 points. The first one is the NPE, or known as the new economic policy. The second one is we will be analyzing briefly according to Malaysia Education Blueprint 2015 until 2025. And then we are also going to analyze our current status in the educational field. Now, firstly, about the NEP, it is historically used quotas in public institutions, for an example, at UiTM, to create a Bumi Putra middle class to ensure that everyone gets equal educational rights. And then the second one is about MEB 2015 until 2025, which this blueprint focuses on equity, which is closing the gap between urban, rural, and also the rich between the poor. And then we are coming up to a new year, which is 2026, which is also the current status, where the focus is now shifting towards the Education Development Blueprint 2026 until 2035, where we are now emphasizing on digital fluency and also artificial intelligence use. Okay, now we are going to talk about the 13th Malaysia Plan within the Educational Development Blueprint 2026 until 2035. Now, this is thoroughly explained by our Prime Minister, Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim, about the Ministry of Education playing field. Now, I've picked up a few important keynotes, and one of them, or the most significant one, is the 67 billion ringgit Malaysia allocation, which is provided to the Ministry of Education to improve and upscaling our educational field. Now, the education sector in Malaysia has been prioritized with a total allocation of the money that I have just said under the 30th Malaysia Plan, or known as 13MP, which covers the period from 2026 to 2030. And this is to aim at driving widespread education reforms and infrastructure upgrades. Now, this data has been collected not only by the 13MP but also by the Ministry of Economy under their analysis during this year. Okay, now the focus area that I'm going to emphasize here are also 3. The first one is regarding TVET, or known as Technical and Vocational Education Training, where they are revamping TVET to remove the second-class stigma. Now, before this, we usually have a stigma where people who enroll in TVET is someone who is not that smart. So, according to this approach, we are trying to abhor the second-class stigma. The second one is the use of AI and also STEM, which is in the 30MP. They are trying to emphasizing the integration of AI and also STEM to prepare all who work under this ministry for high-value jobs. And then the third one is for B40 graduates, where it is mandatory to pay internships to bridge the experience gap for B40 graduates. Okay, now we move on to the next one. Okay, now we are going on to the evaluation. Okay, now the evaluation is very important, as we are going to evaluate critically but also briefly about what we have talked about. The first one is we're going to evaluate according to Bordio and cultural capital. Bordio here is the people who analyze what social mobility is. Now, we're going to emphasize on 3 points. The first one is the critical argument. The second one is Pierre Bourdieu's theory, and also the T20 advantage. Now, the first one is the critical argument. Now, I want to ask you, okay, does education truly level the playing field? This is the critical argument that we need to ensure and that we need to ask ourselves. Is it truly level the playing field? If so, then please comment. If not, then also please comment down below. And then the second one is Pierre Bourdieu's theory. Now, Pierre Bourdieu's theory here, which is cultural capital, he refers it to a non-financial assets like language, for example, English proficiency, social ethics, and also networking. And then we have the final one, which is the T20 advantage. Now here, even with the same degree, a T20 student often have the soft skills and also, most importantly, connections that a B40 student lacks. Now this gives the T20 students a hidden advantage in the job market. Now you can see how social mobility affects every social class and everything. It's very important for us to know that social mobility is the tool or medium or an agent for upscaling our sovereignty or downgrading it. It's very dangerous, and we need to also know the prioritize of it. Next, we are going to evaluate based on the 2024-2025 salary reality based on the data of Statistics Malaysia according to year 2024. Now we are going to only focus on 3 key points, which is the median salary, the gap, and also the analysis. Okay, now the median salary is around 4,521 ringgit, which is for degree holders, they are around 5,724 ringgit, while diploma students are only 3,390 ringgit. And the gap, so we are going to talk about the gap very briefly. While salaries rose by 2.5 to 8.1%, the cost of living in urban areas, for example in Kuala Lumpur, makes upward mobility difficult for fresh graduates because of the economical changes that happens around the globe. And then we move on to the final one, which is the analysis. High educational attainment does not automatically translate to high income status if wage growth lags behind inflation. Now, this is the very brief of the evaluation that we are going through upon the data of Statistics Malaysia. Next, we are going to talk about the urban-rural digital divide. This is also fall under the evaluation, where I'm going to emphasize on 2 points, which is the divide and also the digital mobility trap. So we are going to talk about the first one, which is the divide. Now, urban students have access to 5G, AI labs, and coding, but for rural students, especially in the interior of Sabah and Sarawak, the Bornean side of Malaysia, still struggle with basic connectivity. Now, even though we see a lot of approaches, initiatives, and programs that are being released by the ministry, where we can still see the divide between the urban and rural areas, and this will also lead to the digital mobility trap. Now, if the 2026 economy requires AI skills or artificial intelligence skills, rural students are at an immediate disadvantage, potentially widening the inequality gap rather than closing it. So it's very important for us to actually cater to the geographical factors as well when it comes to the educational field. Final one, we are going to talk about the skill-related underemployment. Now, of course, this is related heavily according to social mobility. Now, the first one is about the statistics. Now, here it says that 32.2% of Malaysian graduates are underemployed, which they are working in jobs below their qualification level. And move to the second one, which is the glass ceiling. Now, for many of them, education results in horizontal mobility, which moving to a job which similar status rather than vertical mobility, moving up a class, which means that they are working in the same position, nothing changes. There is no vertical changes in the social mobility within an individual, which is there's no changes to be said basically. And then the third one, it is the critical conclusion. Now, the education system is producing graduates, but the economy is not producing enough high value jobs to absorb them. Now, of course, education is providing, we are graduating, but as I said here, the economy that happens around the globe does not produce high value jobs, which they have to pursue in higher educational field. So we have come up to the final section of our presentation, which is the conclusion and synthesis. Now, also in 3 points, basically the summary is education remains the most powerful tool for social mobility in Malaysia, but it is not a magic wand. You cannot just simply say, boom, it happens. No, you need a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of hard works to pursue in anything that you can, so that you provide yourself with enough educational qualities to ensure that you are in the same level of educational field around the globe. The key finding here is that first, the policies, which is the NEP and also the NEB, have expanded access, but unfortunately the quality and equity remain the issues. The second one is the cultural capital and the digital divide act as an invisible barrier to the B40 students. And to round up everything, we have the final evaluation. To achieve the 30th Malaysian Plan goals, the focus must shift from quantity of degrees to quantity of skills, and also most importantly, I'm very sorry, the most importantly is fair wages. Alright, so this is the references that I've been using throughout my presentation. There are 6. Feel free to look upon it, feel free to analyze about it. And I think that will be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you do have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And see you again in the next video or in the next assignment. Thank you. Bye bye.